Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Liberty, watching the stars drift past through the main view screen. The ship moved quietly through space on its weekly patrol route along the outer rim of Federation territory. Jake had been doing this same job for 8 years now, and nothing much ever happened out here in the empty void between star systems. The Liberty was not a big ship compared to the massive Federation battleships that protected the core worlds. But it was well armed with the latest plasma cannons and ion disruptors. More importantly, it carried the best energy shield generators that Federation science could build. Those shields could stop any weapon that hostile aliens might fire at them. Lisa Grant sat at the tactical station running her daily checks on the weapon systems. She was a tall woman with short brown hair who had served with Jake for 3 years. Lisa knew every plasma rifle and photon torpedo on the ship better than she knew her own reflection. She turned to face Jake with a small smile on her face. "All weapons are green, Captain," she said in her usual calm voice. "The shields are running at full power and all systems. Check out perfectly." Pete Collins looked up from the engineering console, where he had been monitoring the ship's fusion reactor. Pete was a big man with thick arms who could fix anything that broke on the Liberty. He had worked on Federation ships for 15 years and had never seen an energy weapon that could get through modern shields. "Engine core is stable, Captain," Pete reported. "We could run like this for another 50 years without any problems." Amy Carter sat at the communications station listening to the routine chatter between Federation ships scattered across this sector. Amy was young and had only been in space for 2 years, but she was the best radio operator Jake had ever worked with. She could pick up signals from halfway across the galaxy if she needed to. "Nothing unusual on the COM channels, sir," Amy said, without looking away from her instruments. "Just the regular cargo ships and mining vessels checking in with base." Jake nodded and settled back into his command chair. This was exactly the kind of quiet, peaceful patrol that he preferred. No alien raiders attacking Federation colonies and no mysterious signals from unknown ships. Just empty space and plenty of time to think about retirement. The Federation had been at peace for over 30 years now. All the major alien races had joined the galactic government and agreed to use the same advanced technology. Every ship in space carried energy weapons and energy shields. The old days of primitive kinetic weapons firing metal bullets were long forgotten. No civilization would be foolish enough to use such ancient technology when plasma beams could burn through solid steel in seconds. "Captain, I'm getting something strange on the long-range sensors," Lisa called out suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence on the bridge. "There's a large object about 2 light hours ahead of us, but it's not moving and it's not sending out any identification signals." Jake sat up straighter in his chair and looked at the tactical display. A red dot appeared on the star chart showing the location of the unknown object. It was sitting right in the middle of empty space with no planets or asteroids nearby. "Can you tell what it is?" Jake asked. Lisa worked at her console for several minutes running every scan the Liberty's sensors could perform. She frowned and shook her head slowly. "It's definitely artificial, Captain, but the design doesn't match anything in our database," she said. "The whole material is some kind of metal alloy that I've never seen before, and the power readings are completely dead." "A derelict ship," Pete said from his station. "Probably been floating out here for decades." Jake considered their options. Federation regulations required them to investigate any unknown vessels they encountered, especially ones that might pose a threat to shipping lanes. But this object was clearly dead in space with no power and no life signs. "Set course for the object," Jake ordered, "but keep our shields up and weapons ready just in case." The Liberty changed direction and began moving toward the mysterious vessel. As they got closer, the object resolved into a massive ship unlike anything any of them had ever seen. It was angular and brutal-looking with thick armor plating instead of the smooth curves that characterized modern Federation designs. "I'm reading the ship's database now," Amy said as she worked to decode the alien computer systems. "This vessel is over 3,000 years old, Captain, and it belonged to a race called the Forvani." "Never heard of them," Jake said. "According to this data, they were wiped out in some kind of war about 2 millennia before humans joined the Federation, Amy continued, but Captain, you need to see what's in their weapons lockers. The main screen flickered and showed the interior of the alien ship's armory. Rows and rows of strange devices lined the walls. They looked like primitive tubes with handles and triggers. Metal projectiles were stacked in boxes beside them. What are those things? Lisa asked, staring at the screen. Pete laughed and shook his head. Those are bullet guns, he said, ancient kinetic weapons that fire little pieces of metal. Our ancestors used similar devices back on Earth thousands of years ago. Before we developed energy weapons, Jake studied the primitive weapons with curiosity. It was hard to believe that any civilization would actually use such crude technology in battle. The metal bullets would bounce harmlessly off modern energy shields. No wonder the Corvani had been wiped out if this was the best they could do. Well, they're certainly not a threat to anyone now, Jake said. Make a note in the log and transmit the coordinates to Federation Archaeology. They might want to study this old museum piece. The crew of the Liberty had no idea that in just a few days, these ancient weapons would become the most important discovery in galactic history. 3 days after discovering the ancient Corvani ship, Jake Morrison was reviewing patrol reports in his quarters when the emergency alarm began blaring throughout the Liberty. He rushed to the bridge where Lisa Grant was already at her station, studying the tactical display with a worried expression. What's the situation? Jake asked as he dropped into his command chair. We just received a distress call from Research Station Beta 7 on Artemis Colony. Lisa replied quickly. The transmission was cut off in the middle of the message, but they were reporting ships of unknown origin attacking the facility. Amy Carter looked up from her communications console with concern written across her young face. I've been trying to re-establish contact for the past 10 minutes. Captain, but there's nothing but static coming from that sector. Jake felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Research Station Beta 7 housed over 300 Federation scientists and their families. They were working on new shield technology and energy weapon improvements in laboratories that were supposed to be completely safe behind Federation defensive networks. How long to reach Artemis? Jake asked. Pete Collins checked his engineering readouts and did quick calculations in his head. At maximum warp, we can be there in 6 hours, Captain, but I recommend we wait for backup before we go charging into unknown territory. Jake was about to reply when Amy's communications board lit up with an incoming priority message. The main screen flickered and Admiral Kate Hughes appeared looking stern and determined. Her gray hair was pulled back severely and her blue eyes held the kind of steel that came from 30 years of military service. All Federation vessels in the Outer Rim sector are ordered to converge on Artemis Colony immediately, Admiral Hughes said without any preliminary greeting. We have confirmed reports of hostile alien forces attacking our research facilities and I'm taking personal command of the response fleet. Admiral, what do we know about these attackers? Jake asked. Very little, Captain Morrison, Hughes replied. They appeared without warning using ships of completely unknown design, and they ignored all attempts at peaceful communication. The battleship Valiant is already en route with 2 cruiser squadrons, and we expect to arrive at Artemis in approximately 4 hours, Jake nodded grimly. Admiral Hughes was one of the most experienced combat commanders in the Federation fleet. If she was personally leading the response, then this situation was more serious than a simple pirate raid. The Liberty will rendezvous with your fleet, Admiral, Jake said. We may not be a battleship, but we can still contribute to the fight. Acknowledged, Captain, Hughes said. All ships are to maintain full shields and prepare for immediate combat upon arrival at Artemis. Hughes out, the transmission ended, and Jake turned to his crew. They had trained for combat situations like this, but none of them had ever faced actual hostile aliens in battle. The Federation had been at peace for so long that most military officers had never fired a weapon in anger. Lisa, make sure all our energy weapons are fully charged and ready, Jake ordered. Pete, I want maximum power to the shields and engines. Amy, keep monitoring all frequencies for any intelligence about what we're facing. The next 4 hours passed slowly as the Liberty raced through hyperspace toward Artemis Colony. Jake tried to stay calm, but his mind kept returning to the 300 civilians who might already be dead or captured by hostile forces. The Federation was supposed to protect its citizens and keep them safe from exactly this kind of attack when they dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Artemis system. Jake immediately saw that the situation was worse than anyone had expected. The space around the colony was filled with ships engaged in a massive battle. Bright flashes of plasma fire and ion beams lit up the darkness as Federation vessels fought desperately against attackers using vessels unlike anything in the galactic database. "My God," Lisa whispered as she studied the tactical readings. "There must be over 100 enemy ships out there." The hostile vessels were angular and primitive-looking with thick armor plating and crude weapon systems. They moved in tight formations, firing what appeared to be simple projectile weapons at the sleek Federation ships. Jake watched in amazement as the enemy bullets bounced harmlessly off the energy shields protecting Admiral Hughes' fleet. "This should be easy," Pete said with confidence. "Their weapons can't even scratch our shields." Amy's communications board crackled with Admiral Hughes' voice cutting through the battle chatter. "All ships, this is Admiral Hughes. Enemy forces are using primitive kinetic weapons that pose no threat to our defensive systems. All vessels engage at will and show these aliens the power of Federation technology." Jake watched the battle unfold on his view screen as the Valiant and her escort ships moved into attack formation. The Federation plasma cannons opened fire, sending brilliant beams of energy toward the enemy fleet. Several hostile ships exploded in bright flashes as the advanced weapons tore through their armor. "Take us in, Lisa," Jake ordered. "Target the nearest enemy vessel and prepare to fire." The Liberty accelerated toward the battle zone with its shields glowing bright blue as they deflected the primitive bullets fired by the hostile ships. Jake felt a surge of confidence as he watched the enemy projectiles bounce off their defenses like raindrops hitting a window. "Plasma cannons locked on target, Captain," Lisa reported, firing now. Twin beams of superheated plasma lanced out from the Liberty and struck an enemy cruiser amidships. The alien vessel's armor glowed white-hot and began to buckle under the intense heat. Secondary explosions rippled along its hull as the Federation weapons did their deadly work. For the first hour of battle, everything went exactly as expected. The Federation fleet systematically destroyed enemy ships while taking almost no damage in return. The hostile forces seemed completely unable to penetrate modern energy shields with their ancient kinetic weapons. Jake began to relax as he watched enemy vessels exploding all around them. These aliens might have numbers on their side, but they were fighting with technology that was thousands of years out of date. It would only be a matter of time before the Federation fleet achieved complete victory, but then something unexpected began to happen. The enemy ships stopped firing their weapons and began moving into a tight, defensive formation around the largest vessels in their fleet. Jake watched with growing concern as more and more hostile reinforcements arrived from hyperspace. "Captain, I'm reading massive power buildups from the enemy fleet," Lisa called out urgently. "They're charging some kind of weapon system that I've never seen before." Admiral Hughes' voice cut across all communication channels with barely controlled. "Alarm. All ships prepare for unknown weapon discharge. Maintain maximum shield power and be ready for evasive maneuvers." Jake gripped the arms of his command chair as he watched hundreds of enemy ships suddenly open fire simultaneously. But instead of the harmless bullets they had been using, these new weapons sent streams of dense metal projectiles racing toward the Federation fleet at incredible velocity. The Liberty shook violently as the kinetic bombardment struck their shields. The Liberty shuddered under the impact of thousands of metal projectiles striking its energy shields. Jake Morrison gripped his command chair as the ship rocked back and forth from the kinetic bombardment. Warning lights flashed red across the bridge as power systems struggled to maintain the defensive barriers. "Shield strength down to 80%, Lisa Grant shouted over the noise of straining machinery. "These projectiles are hitting us faster and harder than anything I've ever seen." Pete Collins worked frantically at his engineering station trying to reroute power to the shield generators. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he watched energy levels dropping steadily under the relentless assault from the enemy fleet. "Captain, the shields are losing power faster than I can compensate," Pete called out with worry in his voice. "Whatever. Those aliens are firing at us. It's designed to overload our defensive systems." Jake watched the tactical display as Admiral Hughes' fleet found itself under sustained attack from hundreds of enemy vessels. The hostile ships had formed a massive wall of firepower that was systematically hammering every Federation vessel with streams of high-velocity projectiles. The beautiful blue glow of energy shields began to flicker and fade as ship after ship struggled to maintain their defenses. Amy Carter's communications board erupted with distress calls from vessels throughout the Federation fleet. Ship captains reported shield failures and hull breaches as the primitive kinetic weapons proved far more effective than anyone had imagined possible. "Mayday, mayday, this is the cruiser Horizon," came one panicked transmission. "Our shields have failed and we're taking massive hull damage. Requesting immediate assistance. This is the destroyer Falcon." Another captain called out desperately. "We've lost main power and our shields are completely down. Enemy projectiles are tearing through our armor like paper." Jake felt his confidence evaporating as he realized that the Federation fleet was in serious trouble. The enemy had clearly planned this attack to exploit weaknesses in modern defensive technology that no one had even known existed. "Captain, shield power is down to 40% and falling fast," Lisa reported grimly. "At this rate, we'll lose our barriers completely within the next 10 minutes. The main view screen showed the battleship Valiant struggling under concentrated fire from dozens of enemy vessels. Admiral Hughes' flagship was one of the most powerful warships in the Federation fleet, but even its massive shield generators were beginning to fail under the kinetic bombardment. Suddenly, the space around the Valiant erupted in explosions as enemy projectiles began penetrating the weakened shields. Jake watched in horror as metal slugs tore through the battleship's hull, sending debris and atmosphere streaming into the vacuum of space. "All ships, this is Admiral Hughes," came a strained transmission from the flagship. "Our shields are failing and we're taking critical damage. All vessels are ordered to withdraw immediately and regroup at the edge of the system." Jake wanted to stay and fight, but he knew that the Liberty would be destroyed within minutes if their shields collapsed completely. The ship's hull was designed to deflect energy weapons, not to withstand impacts from solid projectiles traveling at enormous speeds. "Lisa, lay in a course away from the enemy fleet," Jake ordered reluctantly. "Pete, give me everything you can to the engines." The Liberty turned away from the battle and accelerated toward the edge of the Artemis system along with the surviving ships of Admiral Hughes' fleet. Behind them, the enemy vessels continued their devastating bombardment, destroying any Federation ship that was too slow to escape. Jake counted the vessels limping away from the battlefield and felt sick to his stomach. They had started the battle with over 60 ships, and now less than half that number remained operational. The others had been destroyed or so badly damaged that they could barely maintain life support. "Captain, I'm getting damage reports from across the fleet," Amy said quietly. "We've lost the cruisers Horizon and Defender completely. The destroyer Falcon is venting atmosphere and has no power. The battleship Valiant has major hull breaches. And Admiral Hughes is reporting casualties in the hundreds." Pete looked up from his engineering console with a grim expression. "Our own shields held better than most, Captain, but we still took some hits to the outer hull. Nothing critical, but it shows just how vulnerable we really are without proper defenses." Lisa stared at her tactical display in disbelief. "I don't understand how this happened," she said. "Those were just metal bullets. Our shields should have stopped them easily. Every simulation and test showed that kinetic weapons were completely obsolete against modern defensive technology." Jake nodded slowly as he tried to make sense of what they had just experienced. The enemy had used the Federation's own confidence against them, turning their advanced shields into a liability rather than an asset. "They knew exactly what they were doing," Jake said thoughtfully. "Those aliens fired small projectiles first to make us think their weapons were harmless. Then, when we were committed to the battle, they switched to their real weapons designed to overload shield generators through sustained bombardment. The Liberty reached the rally point at the edge of the system where Admiral Hughes was attempting to reorganize what remained of her fleet. The battleship Valiant looked like it had been through a meat grinder with huge tears in its hull and entire sections, venting atmosphere into space. Captain Morrison, report to the flagship immediately for emergency briefing, came Admiral Hughes' voice over the communication system. Bring your senior staff and any data you collected about enemy weapons and tactics. Jake gathered Lisa Pete and Amy for the short shuttle flight to the Valiant. The interior of the flagship showed the devastating effects of kinetic weapons on modern spacecraft. Corridors that had been sleek and polished now showed twisted metal and emergency repairs. Where enemy projectiles had penetrated the hull, Admiral Hughes met them in the main briefing room, looking older than Jake had ever seen her. Her uniform was torn and there was a bandage on her left arm where shrapnel had cut her during the battle. Gentlemen, ladies, we have a serious problem, Hughes began without any preliminaries. The enemy fleet is calling itself the Dominion of Zereth. And they just demonstrated that our entire military doctrine is fundamentally flawed. She activated a holographic display showing the battle they had just fought. The tactical analysis revealed the systematic way the Zereth had overwhelmed Federation defenses using weapons technology that everyone had considered primitive. Their strategy was brilliant in its simplicity, Hughes continued. They used weak kinetic weapons to convince us they were no threat, then switched to massive kinetic bombardment designed specifically to overload energy shield systems. Once our shields failed, their projectiles tore through our hulls like they were made of tissue paper. Jake studied the data and felt a chill run down his spine. The Zereth had not stumbled onto this tactic by accident. They had clearly studied Federation technology and developed weapons specifically designed to exploit its weaknesses. Admiral, what's our next move? Jake asked. Hughes looked at each of them with steel in her eyes despite the defeat they had just suffered. We're going back to Earth to warn the Federation Council and figure out how to fight an enemy that has made our most advanced weapons completely useless. Jake Morrison stood before the Federation High Council in the gleaming chamber beneath the surface of Earth, trying to convince the most powerful leaders in the galaxy that their entire military was obsolete. The 12 council members sat behind their curved desk, looking skeptical as Jake described the devastating defeat at Artemis Colony. Captain Morrison, your report is certainly disturbing, said Counselor Frank Weber, the elderly human representative, but you're asking us to believe that primitive kinetic weapons somehow defeated our most advanced battleships. That seems highly unlikely. With respect, sir, I was there, Jake replied firmly. I watched the Zereth systematically destroy Admiral Hughes' fleet using nothing but metal projectiles fired at high velocity. Our energy shields were completely useless against sustained kinetic bombardment. Counselor Elena Vasquez, the stern woman from Alpha Centauri, leaned forward with a frown. The Federation has invested centuries developing energy shield technology. Captain, are you suggesting that all of our defensive systems are worthless? Not worthless, ma'am, but vulnerable, Jake said carefully. The Zereth found a way to overload our shield generators by hitting them with massive numbers of projectiles simultaneously. Once the shields failed, our ships had no protection against kinetic weapons. The alien council members whispered among themselves in their native languages. Jake could see doubt and disbelief in their expressions. The idea that advanced civilizations could be threatened by primitive bullet weapons challenged everything the Federation believed about modern warfare. Captain Morrison, we appreciate your report, said Counselor Weber dismissively, but the Federation military leadership will need to study this situation more carefully before making any drastic changes to our defense doctrine. Jake felt frustration building inside him as he realized the Council was not taking the Zereth threat seriously. They were so convinced of their technological superiority that they could not accept the possibility of being defeated by weapons they considered obsolete. Sir, while you're studying the situation, the Zereth are conquering Federation colonies, Jake said with barely controlled anger. Every day we delay gives them more time to expand their territory and enslave our citizens. That will be all, Captain, Counselor Weber said coldly. You're dismissed. Jake left the council chamber feeling defeated and angry. The Federation leadership was going to wait until it was too late to act. By the time they accepted the reality of the Zira threat, half the galaxy might be under enemy control. He made his way through the corridors of Federation headquarters to the Archaeological Division where Dr. Helen Price was waiting for him. Dr. Price was a small woman with gray hair who had spent her career studying ancient civilizations and their technologies. Captain, I've been reviewing the data you collected from that Corvani derelict, Dr. Price said as they walked toward her laboratory. I think I may have found something important. She led him into a room filled with holographic displays showing the interior of the ancient alien ship. The primitive kinetic weapons were highlighted in blue, while computer analysis scrolled past in multiple languages. The Corvani were not using these weapons because they were primitive, Dr. Price explained, according to their historical records. They developed kinetic weapons specifically to fight enemies who used energy shields. Jake stared at the displays with growing understanding. They face the same problem we're facing now, exactly, Dr. Price said excitedly. The Corvani fought a war against a coalition of species that had perfected energy shield technology. They discovered that sustained kinetic bombardment could overload shield generators and developed these weapons as a countermeasure. She activated another display showing detailed technical specifications for various Corvani weapons. There were simple projectile rifles that looked remarkably similar to ancient human firearms and massive rail guns designed to fire building-sized metal slugs at enemy spacecraft. Captain, the principles behind these weapons are almost identical to technologies that humanity used before we developed energy weapons. Dr. Price continued, we have extensive historical records of kinetic weapons from Earth's early industrial period. Jake felt a spark of hope for the first time since the battle at Artemis. Are you saying we could build weapons like these? More than that, Captain, Dr. Price said with a smile. We could build much better versions using modern materials and manufacturing techniques. The Federation has the technology to create kinetic weapons that would make the Zirith bombardment look like a light rain. Jake immediately contacted Admiral Hughes and requested permission to assemble a research team. Within hours, he found himself working with some of the brightest minds in the Federation, including ballistics expert Commander Roy Bennett and weapons engineer Dr. Sam Turner. Commander Bennett was a quiet man who had studied ancient warfare as a hobby. He brought historical data about human kinetic weapons from Earth's military museums and showed the team how chemical explosives could propel metal projectiles at devastating speeds. The basic principle is simple, Bennett explained. You create a controlled explosion behind a metal bullet and use the expanding gases to accelerate it down a barrel toward the target. Humans used this technology for over 1,000 years before energy weapons were developed. Dr. Turner nodded thoughtfully as he studied the historical weapons. We could improve on these designs dramatically using modern materials and manufacturing techniques. Electromagnetic railguns could fire projectiles at speeds approaching 10% of light velocity. The team worked around the clock developing new kinetic weapon systems based on ancient human firearms and Corvani military technology. They designed everything from personal weapons for infantry soldiers to massive orbital bombardment systems that could level entire cities. Meanwhile, reports continued to arrive from across the galaxy. The Zirith Dominion was expanding rapidly, conquering Federation colonies and enslaving millions of citizens. Admiral Hughes' requests for reinforcements were denied by the High Council, which still refused to believe that kinetic weapons posed a serious threat. Captain, we need to test these weapons against actual energy shields, Dr. Price said after a week of intensive development work. I've arranged for us to use the testing facility on Luna, where we can conduct live fire exercises. Jake assembled a small team including Lisa Grant and Pete Collins for the trip to Earth's moon. The Federation testing facility there had been used for decades to evaluate new energy weapons, but now it would host the first kinetic weapons tests in over 2 centuries. They started with simple chemical propellant, firearms firing metal bullets at energy shield generators. The results were immediately encouraging as sustained fire from multiple weapons caused visible fluctuations in the shield energy output. "It's working," Lisa said with excitement as she watched the shield generator struggle to deflect the kinetic projectiles. "The bullets are forcing the system to constantly recalibrate, and that's draining power faster than it can be replaced." Next, they tested electromagnetic railguns firing dense metal slugs at incredible speeds. The impact on the energy shields was devastating, causing massive power fluctuations and eventual complete failure of the defensive systems. "This is it," Jake said with growing confidence. "This is how we're going to beat the Zereth." But even as the weapons tests proved successful, Jake knew they were running out of time. The Zereth were getting stronger every day, and the Federation leadership was still refusing to take action. Soon it might be too late to save the galaxy from conquest by an enemy that understood the weaknesses of modern technology better than its creators. The Federation High Council finally took action when the Zereth conquered the industrial world of New Geneva, destroying the orbital shipyards and enslaving over 2 million colonists. Jake Morrison watched the emergency session from the observation gallery as Counselor Weber stood before his colleagues with a pale face and shaking hands. "The situation has become critical," Weber announced to the assembled council members. "Zereth forces now control 17 Federation systems, and their fleet strength continues to grow with each victory. We must authorize immediate development of alternative weapons technologies." Jake felt relief wash over him as the council voted unanimously to fund his kinetic weapons project. Admiral Hughes had been arguing for weeks that conventional military responses were failing, and now even the most stubborn politicians could see that desperate times required desperate measures. Within days, Jake found himself in command of the largest weapons development project in Federation history. The old manufacturing facilities on Luna that had been shut down for decades were reopened and retrofitted with modern production equipment. Dr. Helen Price led teams of archaeologists and engineers as they reverse-engineered kinetic weapons technology from historical human and Corvani designs. "Captain, we've made remarkable progress in just the first week," Dr. Price reported during their daily briefing. "The railgun prototypes are exceeding all performance expectations, and we should have the first production models ready for testing within the month." Commander Roy Bennett supervised the training programs for Federation soldiers who had never used kinetic weapons in their lives. The learning curve was steep since most military personnel had spent their entire careers relying on energy weapons that required completely different tactics and strategies. "These chemical propellant rifles are actually easier to use than plasma weapons," Bennett explained to a group of nervous infantry soldiers. "There's no power cell to monitor and no heat build-up to worry about. Just point the weapon at your target and pull the trigger." Jake watched the training exercises with fascination as human soldiers rediscovered the weapons their ancestors had used centuries earlier. The simple mechanical action of loading bullets into metal cartridges and firing them through rifled barrels seemed primitive compared to modern energy weapons, but the results were undeniably effective. Dr. Sam Turner worked around the clock developing larger kinetic weapon systems for spacecraft and orbital installations. His electromagnetic railguns could accelerate metal projectiles to incredible velocities using magnetic fields instead of chemical explosives. "Captain, these railguns are going to revolutionize space combat," Turner said excitedly as he showed Jake the latest test results. "We can fire tungsten slugs at 10% of light speed with pinpoint accuracy at targets thousands of kilometers away." The first real test came when Zereth scouts attacked the research facility on Titan. Jake was aboard the Liberty conducting weapons trials when the enemy ships appeared without warning and began their standard bombardment pattern designed to overload energy shields. "All ships, this is Captain Morrison," Jake broadcast to the small Federation force defending the facility. "Disengage energy shields and prepare to engage with kinetic weapons only." Lisa Grant looked at him with concern from her tactical station. "Captain, are you sure about this? Without shields, we'll be completely vulnerable if this doesn't work." "It's going to work," Jake said with more confidence than he felt. "The Zereth are expecting us to rely on energy shields. When we don't, their tactics won't be effective." The Liberty and 3 other Federation ships moved to intercept the Zereth raiders with their energy shields deactivated and their newly installed railguns charged and ready. The enemy vessels immediately began their bombardment, assuming that sustained kinetic fire would quickly overload the Federation defensive systems, but instead of hiding behind failing energy barriers, the Federation ships opened fire with their own kinetic weapons. Streams of tungsten projectiles lanced across space at incredible speeds, striking the Zereth vessels with devastating effect. "Direct hit on the lead enemy ship," Lisa shouted with excitement. "Their armor is no match for our railgun projectiles." The Zereth raiders found themselves facing an enemy that fought using their own tactics, but with superior technology and training. The Federation railguns fired faster and more accurately than the primitive kinetic weapons the aliens were used to facing. Within 30 minutes, all 6 Zereth ships had been destroyed or disabled. Jake felt a surge of satisfaction as he watched the enemy vessels drifting powerless in space. The weapons that had seemed so devastating at Artemis Colony were no match for modern kinetic technology developed by human engineers. "Amy, send a message to Admiral Hughes," Jake ordered. "Tell her that kinetic weapons are effective against Zereth forces and recommend immediate deployment to all Federation ships." News of the successful defense of Titan spread quickly through the Federation military. Admiral Hughes personally visited the Luna manufacturing facilities to observe production of the new weapons systems and meet with the development teams. "Captain Morrison, you and your people have given the Federation a fighting chance," Hughes said as they toured the railgun assembly lines. "How soon can we equip the entire fleet with these kinetic weapons?" Dr. Price consulted her production schedules and manufacturing projections. "Admiral, we can retrofit existing ships with basic kinetic weapons within 3 months. But full integration of all systems will take at least 6 months. We may not have 6 months, Hughes replied grimly. Zereth forces are massing for what appears to be a major offensive against the core worlds. We need to hit them first with everything we've got. Jake studied the strategic situation and realized that the Federation had one advantage the Zereth didn't expect. The enemy had grown confident after their easy victories against energy weapons, and would not be prepared for ships equipped with advanced kinetic systems. "Admiral, I recommend we concentrate our retrofitted ships into a single task force and launch a surprise attack on the Zereth stronghold at Artemis Colony." Jake suggested, "If we can retake that system, it will demonstrate to the galaxy that these aliens can be defeated." Hughes nodded thoughtfully as she considered the proposal. "It's risky, Captain, but it might be our best option. The Zereth have been using Artemis as their main base of operations, and destroying their fleet there would cripple their ability to continue their offensive." Over the next 6 weeks, Jake worked with Admiral Hughes to plan Operation Iron Rain. Every available ship in the Federation fleet was retrofitted with kinetic weapons ranging from simple chemical propellant guns for close-range combat to massive electromagnetic railguns for long-distance bombardment. Captain Linda Brooks led the infantry training programs, teaching Federation soldiers how to use kinetic rifles and ammunition that their great-grandparents would have recognized. Sergeant Maria Lopez drilled troops in the tactics of kinetic warfare, which relied more on accurate marksmanship than the overwhelming firepower of energy weapons. "Remember, soldiers, these bullets don't penetrate energy shields, but they will punch right through armor plating," Lopez explained to her trainees. "Make every shot count, because you can't just spray plasma fire and hope for the best." Commander Tony Walsh supervised the naval gunnery training as ship crews learned to operate rail guns and kinetic artillery. The weapons required different skills than energy systems, since projectiles traveled much slower than plasma beams, and gunners had to calculate trajectory and lead time for moving targets. As the retrofit program neared completion, Jake felt cautiously optimistic about their chances. The Federation now had ships equipped with weapons the Zereth had never faced and tactics the enemy would not expect. But he also knew that they would get only one chance to prove that kinetic weapons could defeat the alien invaders. The fate of the galaxy would be decided in the coming battle at Artemis Colony. Admiral Kate Hughes stood on the bridge of the retrofitted battleship Valiant, watching the Artemis system grow larger on the main view screen. Behind her stretched the largest Federation fleet ever assembled, with over 200 ships equipped with the most advanced kinetic weapons that human engineering could produce. Jake Morrison commanded a squadron of destroyers that had been completely rebuilt around massive electromagnetic railguns. "All ships report ready for combat, Admiral," came the voice of Captain Linda Brooks from the communications station. "Kinetic weapons are charged and armor plating is in place." Hughes nodded grimly as she studied the tactical display showing Zereth positions throughout the system. The aliens had turned Artemis colony into their main military base, with hundreds of ships defending the captured research stations and orbital facilities. "Signal all vessels to maintain radio silence and prepare for immediate engagement," Hughes ordered. "Remember, people, the Zereth are expecting us to use energy shields and plasma weapons. When we hit them with kinetic bombardment, they're going to be completely unprepared." The Federation fleet moved into attack formation, with the heavily armored battleships leading the charge, followed by cruisers and destroyers bristling with rail guns and kinetic artillery. Jake felt his heart pounding as the Liberty approached weapons range of the enemy fleet. "Captain, I'm reading over 300 Zereth vessels in defensive positions around the colony," Lisa Grant reported from her tactical station. "They've arranged themselves to maximize their kinetic bombardment capability against ships using energy shields." "Perfect," Jake replied with a cold smile. "They're using the exact tactics that worked against us before, but this time we're not hiding behind energy barriers." The Zereth fleet detected the approaching Federation ships and immediately moved to intercept using their standard battle formation. Streams of metal projectiles began crossing space as the alien vessels opened fire, expecting to quickly overload enemy shield generators. But instead of the familiar blue glow of energy shields, the Federation ships presented bare armored hulls designed to deflect kinetic impacts. The Zereth bombardment struck hardened steel plating and composite armor that had been specifically engineered to withstand projectile weapons. "All ships open fire," Admiral Hughes commanded across all communication channels. "Show these aliens what real kinetic weapons can do." The Federation fleet erupted in flame and thunder as hundreds of railguns fired simultaneously. Tungsten projectiles, accelerated to incredible velocities by electromagnetic fields, streaked across space faster than the eye could follow. The first volley struck the Zereth fleet like a metallic hurricane, tearing through alien armor that had never been designed to withstand such devastating impacts. Jake watched with satisfaction as enemy ships exploded under the kinetic bombardment. The Zereth vessels that had seemed so powerful at the first Battle of Artemis were helpless against modern human weapons technology. "Target the enemy flagship," Jake ordered as the Liberty's main railgun locked onto a massive Zereth battleship. "Fire when ready." The destroyer's primary weapon discharged with a sound like thunder, sending a projectile the size of a telephone pole racing toward the alien command ship. The tungsten slug struck the enemy vessel amidships and punched completely through its hull before exploding out the other side in a shower of debris. "Direct hit, Captain," Lisa shouted over the noise of combat. "Enemy flagship is venting atmosphere and falling out of formation." The battle raged for hours as the two fleets hammered each other with kinetic weapons. But the Federation ships had superior armor and more advanced railgun technology that gave them a decisive advantage over their alien opponents. Pete Collins worked frantically at his engineering station, keeping the Liberty's weapons charged and operational. "Captain, our railguns are performing perfectly, but we're using ammunition faster than I expected. We'll need to conserve shots for the final assault on the colony." Amy Carter monitored communications from across the fleet, reporting damage and tactical updates to Jake as the battle developed. "Captain, the Valiant reports minor hull damage, but all weapons remain operational. Admiral Hughes is requesting that we prepare for the ground assault phase." Jake studied the tactical situation and saw that the Zereth fleet was beginning to break apart under the sustained kinetic bombardment. Enemy ships were fleeing toward the edges of the system or surrendering to Federation forces. "Signal Admiral Hughes that we're ready to begin planetary bombardment," Jake ordered. It's time to show the Zereth what happens when they mess with human colonies. The Federation fleet moved into orbit around Artemis Colony and began the most devastating bombardment in galactic history. Massive orbital railguns fired building-sized projectiles from space, while smaller weapons targeted specific Zereth installations on the planet's surface. The kinetic bombardment system that Dr. Sam Turner had designed proved incredibly effective. Tungsten rods dropped from orbit, accelerated to enormous speeds by the planet's gravity, and struck enemy fortifications with the force of nuclear weapons but without the radiation. "My God," Lisa whispered as she watched the orbital strikes through the Liberty's sensors. "Those projectiles are hitting the surface with enough energy to create artificial earthquakes." The Zereth ground forces tried to fight back using their own kinetic weapons, but they were no match for the precision bombardment from space. Federation targeting systems guided each projectile to its intended target with devastating accuracy. Within 6 hours, the alien defenses on Artemis Colony had been completely destroyed. Captain Brooks led the first wave of Federation ground troops as they landed to liberate the captured research facilities and free any surviving colonists. "Admiral, this is Brooks reporting from the surface," came her voice over the communication system. "Zereth resistance has collapsed, and we've secured the primary research station. We're finding Federation prisoners who have been held captive for months." Jake felt a surge of emotion as he realized they had actually won. The Federation fleet had not only defeated the Zereth forces, but had proven that kinetic weapons could be devastatingly effective when used by skilled human engineers and soldiers. Admiral Hughes appeared on the main screen looking exhausted but triumphant. "Captain Morrison, I want to personally thank you and your crew for everything you've done. Without your discovery of those ancient Corvani weapons and your work developing modern kinetic technology, we would never have been able to achieve this victory." "Thank you, Admiral, but the real heroes are the people who built these weapons and the soldiers who used them in combat," Jake replied. "They proved that sometimes old ideas are the best ideas." Over the following weeks, news of the Federation victory at Artemis spread throughout the galaxy. The Zereth Dominion found itself facing enemies equipped with weapons they could not counter, and their expansion ground to a halt. Jake stood in his quarters aboard the Liberty reading reports of Zereth forces surrendering across multiple star systems. The aliens who had seemed so confident in their technological superiority were learning that humans had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of kinetic warfare. Dr. Helen Price sent him a message from Earth describing the new military doctrine being developed by Federation strategists. Energy weapons would remain important for certain applications, but kinetic systems were now considered essential for any military force. "Captain, we've created something new," Price wrote, "a hybrid approach that combines the best of both technologies. Energy shields for protection against plasma weapons and kinetic armor for defense against projectiles. Railguns for long-range bombardment and particle beams for precision strikes." Jake smiled as he realized that the galaxy would never again make the mistake of assuming any weapon technology was obsolete. The Federation had learned that innovation often came from combining new ideas with ancient wisdom. The Liberty received new orders to patrol the Outer Rim territories and ensure that the Zereth could not regroup for another offensive. As they departed Artemis Colony, Jake looked back at the planet where human ingenuity had saved the galaxy from conquest. Lisa Grant approached him with a small metal object in her hand. "Captain, I thought you might want to keep this as a souvenir." Jake examined the object and realized it was one of the primitive bullets from the ancient Corvani ship, the simple piece of metal that had started their journey toward understanding kinetic weapons. "Sometimes the oldest solutions are the best solutions," Jake said as he placed the bullet on his desk, where it would remind him that progress didn't always mean abandoning the past.